Hi, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk Risk, where our goal is to connect, engage, and inspire as we build a global community of risk practitioners. I'm your host, Naveen Agarwal, and today we have a guest here with Peter Braido from Mediview. He's a VP of R&D at Mediview. But guys, I just want to start by letting you know that this is a recorded conversation because of scheduling conflicts. We are not able to broadcast this live, but fear not, I will be present and be able to answer or respond to any questions or comments you share in the chat. So feel free to keep them going. We still want to have a great conversation, an engaging conversation today. So please share what you have in mind. And just to start, give a brief introduction about yourself, where you are joining from. With that, I welcome all of you. And Peter, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. I'm doing well, and I look forward to our fruitful conversation.
Wonderful. So, Peter, you have more than 20 years of experience in the medical device industry, in engineering, and also in leadership positions. So, can you start by just sharing a little bit of your background today with us?
Yeah, thanks for that. I've worked in the medical industry for about 23 years now, and I went to school at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, working also on the front end of what was the inception of the biomechanical engineering curriculum. So I've always been interested and working in the medical field, even when it's at the early stages or not necessarily certified as such. And so I've always enjoyed being on the front end, cutting edge of the technology in the medical field. And I worked after University of Illinois, I worked for St. Jude, which became Abbott, working on tissue and later transcatheter heart valves. And as I progressed through that, I was on the ISO 5840 and 5910 committees. And then I transitioned from class 3 implantables to ablation catheters for heart arrhythmias at Medtronic. And I'm working at Mediview as the VP of R&D, currently working on augmented reality systems for a variety of different use cases. Oncology, probably our beachhead that we're working on. And I'd be happy to talk about any one of those life and or work experiences.
Yeah. So Peter, I think it's fair to say that you have always been at the cutting edge of technology and innovation. And one thing that I want to bring up is that you actually bring a very unique perspective to your work in design and development and launching new products, a very personal, patient-centric approach. Can you share a little bit of your personal story with us?
Yeah, I have had heart valve replacement, aortic heart valve replacement, and that was while I was working on heart valves. So oftentimes as an engineer, we would ask ourselves, because we did a lot of durability and fatigue testing, and we saw many patients, as engineers, we had the opportunity to observe clinically. And the question usually was, are you willing to or are you confident that the engineering work is adequate to put it in your heart valve as a life-sustaining device into your mother or grandmother? And in my case, I actually, in my 30s, I had a congenital bicuspid valve that was becoming stenotic, and I had to have it replaced. And so I would ask myself, is it good enough for myself as well as my family and the community at large? And so I had a perspective. I had some comorbidities, endocarditis. I had a subsequent heart arrhythmia. And so I pretty much have experience on several of the devices, or at least adjacent devices that I've actually personally used. So firsthand experience on what's worked well and what has not. And as I was going through looking at the design and quality of those devices.
Wow. We always hear this advice that as engineers, quality people or regulatory people, we should always keep the patient first and foremost in mind. And your experience is that it is so personal to you. You bring this to your work every day, and you think about safety risk management in a very different light when it comes to developing and launching these innovative products. So that is truly amazing for me to actually hear from you. And in fact, that's where I want to go next in our conversation is now as a leader of R&D group, how do you balance this decision about, safety versus performance? And I know it's not either or, it has to be both, but it does involve a little bit of a trade-off. How do you make sure that you are making the right judgment?
It's very rare that you do not have competing requirements at all levels of the design process. And I remember distinctly when the VP of R&D at the time, about 15 years ago, when I was working on the transcatheter aortic valves, when they were just being put into octogenarians, that or nonagenarians, I guess, originally, when it was high risk at the very beginning. And my VP of R&D said, is 200 million cycles, which is 5 years equivalent on a heart valve opening and closing, is that good enough? Because we have to weigh the benefit, the safety, and the risk of what a device in a certain time period would be to get it out the door, and in a clinical and subsequently commercial trial after the IDE. And it was really a challenging question to ask myself, because a lot of the surgical valves, per the standards, would be going for fatigue, for the frame would be going 15 years equivalent, like 600 million cycles, as opposed to the minimum requirement for the tissue part is 200 million, or 5 years. Mm-hmm. And when you really look at it, for that population at that time, the life expectancy was a year or two, and we could confidently give them 5 years, even though it wasn't, the 15 years we really wanted, to have in a tank of a surgical heart valve. Mm-hmm. And so I had to really ask myself, that was the first time I said, I guess the perfection is the enemy of goodness, and say that this is more beneficial to get out in the world and save these lives and extend or double the life expectancy of these high risk patients, mm-hmm. as opposed to working on it for 5 more years, for 15 years. And meanwhile, those people would have passed away. So those are the types of questions I always ask myself. And is it good enough? And what are the benefits and risks?
So, I think you're bringing up such a great point, and that's where I feel having clarity on the intended use and indication is so critical. In that moment, at that time, I think that seemed actually pretty good from a benefit risk point of view. But Peter, let's play this out. In our industry, we always go for expanded indication, 2 or 3 years after a product is launched. And I would venture to guess that if we were to expand the indication to include, broader population, then this 200 million cycles requirement may not be sufficient, right?
Yeah. So if I could use myself as an example, I was in my mid-30s and I had a mechanical heart valve replacement. And a lot of people are saying, well, you worked on transcatheter valves, aren't you confident in that? You can just, when it wears out, you can just put another one in. Mm-hmm. But when you think about it, you can only put so many heart valves in an orifice, and I'm a medium-sized person, so I might be able to get away with 2. Mm-hmm. And the younger you are, the quicker they deteriorate. And so I looked at the risk, and I wanted one surgical valve for my entire life. I knew I had to be on warfarin, and there are risks around that. But I would never have to go in for another heart valve. It could last, 50, 60, 70 years. Whereas the tissue valve had less risk, or transcatheter tissue valve, less risk from the procedure, and higher quality of life initially. But I had to weigh the risk that was not going to last, as long as I wanted to, because I probably would have had to have 3 replacements, in that time frame. even if it lasted the 15 years. And I subsequently had I had, comorbidities and issues from the warfarin, which I could talk about that experience, because that is an interesting one that is ongoing.
Yeah.
About the INR testing and those that equipment and the standard that certain devices are held to. But yeah, it's definitely something you have to weigh multiple factors in quality of life, and that can be difficult to quantify sometimes.
Yeah. And I think this is bringing up a very good point, is that benefit risk is not a black and white judgment, not a straightforward answer. And you have to consider many different factors. Most importantly, what is the target population? What is their characteristic? And in this particular case, you are sharing your personal experience that for you, the transcatheter tissue valve probably was not the right choice. It was a mechanical valve because life expectancy. And so for quality regulatory professionals and even engineers, I don't know if this level of understanding and maturity comes so naturally. And you bring your personal experience. So my question to you is that how do you bring in that perspective in the development process where we are talking about these practical topics and we are not getting so stuck on design requirements or regulatory requirements or our project plans or launch timelines? How do you bring that perspective? I'm very curious to hear your experience on that.
Well, I think you're asking me as a technical leader, how do I mentor my team to think in that manner?
Yes.
And I just had a conversation this morning with a brilliant engineer, Sina, that I'm working with. And I had this conversation. We just did a design of experiments on one of the devices for Mediview. And I love design of experiments because even though 3/4 of his observations came out in the numbers, it was really not until we looked at the multifactorial, like nonlinear functionality of it and started flipping the switches and putting in competing requirements that we got to an optimal, design. And that is very difficult to see on the surface with only observations without numbers telling it. And at a deeper level, even the numbers can lie because you can tell various stories from the same numbers. And we had a conversation about how we would present and tell the story and get cross-functional feedback from actually, Phil, who is one of your previous interviewers, human factors part of it, as well as, some of the design engineers with the accuracy. How is this going to be used for competing requirements? Are the values and the design inputs that we're going to feed into the DOE for the prediction of the model, are they realistic? Are they practically significant? Not only are they statistically significant. So yeah, I challenge my my engineers to think, practical and statistical significant, and to think about a deeper level and trying to tell the story and getting that cross-functional feedback.
That's incredible. I really admire that and appreciate it. Peter, now you are sharing with us essentially good engineering practices. This is what we are trained on. We learn doing DOEs. We are trained to handle these situations. And many times in our current working environment where we have so much pressure on launch timelines and the deliverables, that sometimes people might say, Peter, doesn't this take too long? Like, why can't we just wrap this up and go to market? How do you handle those kind of situations?
That is probably one of the most challenging. And like I said, there's competing clinical and user needs and business needs. And so I gave the example of a heart valve development. My first heart valve, which is surgical heart valve, took from inception to through IDE completion. I think it took about 5 years. But the longevity on that commercial device, maybe 15, 20 years. So the return on investment is, adequate to take a really long time. But we could have, there's diminishing return about developing it to perfection versus is it good enough for the population that that, you specify for the requirements. Whereas it's in my work with Medtronic with ablation catheters is somewhat in between the timeline and longevity of a commercial device to Mediview. Mediview is much faster moving, so it's more software than hardware based, and we're moving very quickly, so we have to be very efficient and nimble and communicative between functions. We have to use high level simulation, emulation, and analysis tools. And I think technically we can work fast enough. It's more of a challenge of, are we making the quick enough decisions for the right procedurals and the right procedure, or proceduralists doing those procedures. And we're carving the way in our regulatory strategies and our clearances. So we have to line up whether it's not only technically the right thing to do, because we could what's the saying, outrun our coverage, So technically we may be able to move really fast with all these superpower tools and engineers. But it's a real challenge to make sure that everyone comes along for the ride, understands, the risks and pros and cons, and from a clinical and a regulatory human factor standpoint, like everyone's got to be on board. I think that's probably more of a challenge.
Yeah.
And we have to spend as much or more time, aligning across the board from start to finish. So that would be my advice. I'm assuming that our engineers are technically strong and we've got the right tools and know how to use them. But the soft skills, I'm still working on them, so yeah. So those are the soft skills. I'm always telling my engineers just to keep on working on them. You're always going to work on them, because every person that gets added, to the team, because Mediview's growing very fast. Every person that gets added to the team changes the dynamics, and your soft skills are going to be challenged in a different way. And you just need to keep on working on that.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit, because without exception, almost every guest I have on this show has emphasized the need for cross-functional collaboration in the design and development space, post-market space, across the board. And let's be honest, this proves to be very challenging in practice. We are still working in our silos. We have our own perspectives, and you're clearly articulating a challenge that we constantly face. So from this perspective, thinking across your over 20 years of experience, what are some of the quick pieces of advice, nuggets of wisdom you can share that leaders, people in the leadership position, can use to foster collaboration?
So I think I'll say three things. So it all starts by leading by example within each one of the functional leaders. And if you don't lead by example, people are not gonna, they're not gonna do what you say unless you act, like walk the walk. And then that flows into the objectives, and the objectives can be cascading from our CEO and president and down through our CTO and myself and so on. And so I put objectives for my team around those areas of improvement. And I make sure that I not only flow them up, but if there's a gap from them flowing down from our executive management, I make sure that that's rectified, because if it's in the objectives, there are touch points to talk about it, and people are held accountable. So they're more likely to make sure they take that to heart and put actionable SMART, the acronym SMART, objectives for that. And then lastly, I will say that it starts from the top down. And I came to work because at Mediview, I was not looking to leave Medtronic. And I had worked with our CEO and at St. Jude. I actually hired him on at St. Jude, and now I'm working for him.
Okay.
And I worked at Medtronic with him, and I had a level of trust that I not only knew technically what he was doing and agreed with it, but the culture was where I thought it needed to be. Because I have a a sign in my great room that says live your legacy. And he very much lives in that same way, in that same vein. So that always that really starts, from the top and cascades down as it should. So it's very pervasive in a good way at MediView.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that with us. Peter, I have one more question for you because I know medical devices, we work so hard during the design and development and verification, validation, whatnot. But uh, most of the times we are just taking our best guess, right? We learn so much in the post-market phase, how it's going to perform in the marketplace with a broader set of users and different use environments and conditions. We learn so much. And my experience has been that in general, of course, there are pockets of excellence in our industry, but in general, the design and development part of our process is sort of at a distance from the post-market process. How can we bring them together? What is your advice on creating this closed loop feedback, which helps us to get better over time in our new products? Do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, I've been pretty lucky in most all the three positions that encompass my 20 plus years, or three companies. We all had, as engineers, had the opportunity to do animal studies, observations, relate to and give demos and proofs of concept to advisory boards. And so that was of great use. Sometimes I call it the soup du jour. Sometimes you can get feedback and a knee-jerk reaction where it sends you, in an offshoot.
Mhm.
But for the most part, as long as you have a good group that's looking as objectively as possible and, like I said, scoring it with some numbers, and you get some good direction. So at MediView, I really like it because we have a clinical team that is constantly doing clinical research, talking to various proceduralists, because we're indicated for use for a wide spectrum of procedures. So it's difficult to focus in on the key ones for the drive adoption in the business, because we're applicable to so many of them. And so we also have two of our full-time employees two of our employees are full-time physicians. We're always bringing them in. And we have, if you've looked at in the news, Cleveland Clinic and Mayo are big collaborators. We have partnerships, as well as you've seen we've done some work with NIH and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of these very renowned KOLs, as well as just accessibility and running these usability and human factors studies early and often. So I'll bring up Phil as an example. One of your previous interviewers. It's very difficult for a technology development project to get transition over the chasm to a PDP project, and that is one of Mina's main objectives of bringing me in. And I don't think where we differed from my previous experiences is we actually brought in and did usability studies, some of them with our internal physicians early on, pretty much at the concept phase, and even earlier when it's not even a prototype. So usability studies observationally, and talking to the physicians and our partners that I just mentioned, will go into feeding into our clinical and user needs and developing our problem statements and transitioning to practical clinical solutions. And my team does a great job of not doing research for the sake of research, doing research, for a specific clinical solution that we're trying to solve. So I'll give kudos to Phil and his team, because I don't think I've ever had usability studies this early in a project, but it's great for defining our preliminary design inputs before it even becomes a PDP project.
That's awesome. And those of you who are listening, guys, Peter is talking about Phil Deming, who I had on this show a while back, and that recording is available on Let's Talk Risk. So I will share that with you in the show notes. Now, Peter, In the remaining time we have, I want to ask you another personal question that I'm very fascinated by. On your LinkedIn, you share that you were a raptor surveyor and a wildlife specialist for more than 20 years. Tell me how that came about, and if you have used that experience and learning somehow from the nature in your
Oh,
work.
oh yeah. There's a lot there. I could talk an hour about that. So that's one of the hobbies. My in my childhood, I always liked being out in nature, and I have a confluence of technology interests and nature. And nature is I'm generally an introverted type of person. Nature is where I recharge, but also get ideas, taking walks and talking with the other engineers, having walking meetings and things like that. And there's a lot of research. My wife's a biologist, and I played soccer at University of Illinois, so I'd be running late at night, going through forest preserves. I actually had a pair of owls. I would track and everything. So it was very much rejuvenating my mind in between my engineering classes and everything. But I also did some talks about biomimicry.
Mhm.
And there's a field like Velcro, for example, is biomimicry. Certain glues from mollusks and like geckos and things like that. So there's a lot of neural networks, based on biology, so there's a lot of technologies that are engineering based that are based off of biomimicry. So I find it very refreshing, and also sometimes interjecting with my, technical designs.
Yeah.
And I just enjoy, ornithology or birds, the study of birds. And I've had opportunities to release rehabilitated a great horned owl. That was, I think, on my 30th birthday. My wife gave that to me. So there's not much better than
Yeah.
going out and getting exercise, refreshing your soul and your mind, and watching, wildlife and the cycles of
Yeah.
nature. So yeah, so that's kind of
That's nice.
what I did as a hobby.
That's wonderful, Peter. Thank you for sharing that piece of your personal life with us. I find that very motivating. So, we have covered a lot of ground. And, guys, I hope you have enjoyed this conversation. I'm going to give Peter just a couple of minutes to process his thoughts and synthesize this discussion in 2 or 3 key takeaway points. But during this time, I'll share with you a couple of quick announcements. The first one is that I've just kicked off a hands on 4-hour workshop on post market safety surveillance. And there I have distilled many years of my personal industry experience to help you learn regulatory requirements, help you learn data analysis methods, and most importantly, how to detect a signal before it becomes a major problem for you. And I'm also sharing with you how to set up a very efficient operating cross functional post market safety surveillance process. So, if you're interested in that, please reach out to me and I'll be very happy to share that detail with you. Next session is coming up soon. Second announcement is, guys, this, as you know, this is a weekly conversation. If you are interested in these types of casual, informal chats, show up every Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern is when we meet. And if you miss one of these conversations, fear not, because the recordings of our conversations will always be available to you on the Let's Talk Risk newsletter. With that, Peter, I want to invite you to just share just 2 or 3 key takeaway points for us to remember.
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier, and I'll try to give 3 succinct points. And I would say the saying that I try to live by is live your legacy, and make sure that you're doing something that you're passionate about, because it's always going to be a better outcome if you're passionate, and really work towards making a impact in the moment, as well as for the future and in your family and community at large. Second point I'll say is, my father, who is also in the medical industry, said that you'll always have some job security because people are always getting sick and injured. And that's maybe a morbid way of saying that as we age, you will be a patient at some point. So never take lightly the weighing the risks and the competing requirements and the trade-offs. And so So think intuitively about that to make sure that you're ethically and technically making a good decision, but still obviously getting out a device that is commercializable. Within you need to make money, and your business needs to stay alive to make that device that will help those people. So those have to be balanced. And then lastly, we also talked about being communicative, and just make sure that you're bringing people along for the ride, and you're being cross-functionally available. And it's very much nowadays you cannot do anything on your own. It's a team no matter what you do in the medical field, especially in the medical field, because there's so many specific functions that go along with making a device commercialized. So that's utmost important, that I tell new engineers about the soft skills and making sure that you bring that along with the technical skills.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, for ending on that high note. I believe that the future in the medical industry is bright. Look at the work you guys are doing at MediView and bringing high tech into the operating theater, helping doctors do their jobs better, helping improve outcomes. So I also believe this is a wonderful time for all of us to be in the medical device industry and do the best we can, keeping the patients in mind, keeping our own careers in mind and the business in mind. So it takes a lot from all of us, but we also have a lot of opportunities. So Peter, thank you so much for taking this time and sharing your insights and experiences with us. Thanks to all of you guys in the audience for showing up week after week to these sessions. You inspire me, you energize me, and it's because of your engagement that I'm continuing to do this, even though it takes a lot of effort. But I just love this. I love talking to my guests like Peter and engaging with you. So Peter, wishing you all the best as you bring these innovations to market. And thank you once again.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.